Hey guys, once again, welcome back and thank you for watching our last lecture on our Crash Course American Government series for IB History, where we attempt to condense approximately one semester's worth of American government into 2 weeks. So anyways, we've done it before, we're going to do it again, and hopefully you've been paying attention and have picked up a few things along the way. Today is kind of a wrap-up episode. We're going to be talking about some additional issues that we just haven't covered in some of the layout of the Constitution, the background of it, just different things like duties and responsibilities of citizens, and just some final tidbits that didn't belong anywhere else, but we needed to cover for the exam. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pull up our presentation. Great image here that I think really shows what are called checks and balances. So not only the separation of powers, but you have checks and balances. The three branches are there to hold each other accountable. And what makes, and frankly, this is borrowed from the ancient Roman system, where they had a mixed constitution in the Roman Republic, where they had this separation of powers, where, they had, kind of an executive branch, a legislative branch. So in our system, the three different branches have different powers and checks on the other two branches to limit their power and to hold them accountable for their actions. So I want to go over those fairly briefly, and I'm just going to go over what you can see here in the image. So let's start with the legislative branch. Of course, they're the ones that write the laws. So what is their check on the executive? Well, they approve presidential nominees. So, the president will select somebody to be Secretary of State. They don't become Secretary of State until the legislative branch says they can. It can pass laws over a president's veto. We talked about that with the 2/3 vote, and can also impeach. And that's usually the biggest check on the presidency. They can impeach the president. The reverse check from the executive on the from the executive on the legislative is that the president can veto. Okay, so any law that gets passed by the legislative branch, the president can then veto. Let's take a look at the relationship between the legislative branch and the judicial branch, the court systems. So for the check from the legislative to the judicial, the Senate has to confirm the president's choice of federal judges. Okay, so again, kind of a check on both there, and can remove them from office. We talked in our last episode about how Congress can impeach judges as well, even though those are lifelong positions. If somebody does something either illegal or not in line with that role, they can impeach them. Now, the check, which is a major check from the judicial on the legislative branch, is that the court can declare laws unconstitutional. And they have, and many of those that we looked at in our last episode of those landmark cases, we saw that actually happening. Now, the final checks on the branches deal with the executive and judicial. So the check that the president has on the judicial branch is that the president is the one who picks the judges, right? The court system doesn't pick their own judges to fill those roles. The president is the one to pick who fills those federal judgeships. The reverse check, the check from the courts onto the executive branch, is that presidential acts can be declared unconstitutional. So we didn't really get into this power of the presidency, but the president can pass what are called executive orders. And these amount to basically laws. But they can be declared unconstitutional if the court system believes that the president has overreached their authority. And, it's something that at different times has been used. I mentioned a couple. I mentioned FDR's executive order that led to the Japanese internment camps. That was what was being challenged in Korematsu. But a big check there on presidential power and necessarily. Okay, moving on. The other item, and I mentioned this early on, but I did want to just solidify this process, is amendments. And an amendment is either a change or an addition to the Constitution. And these changes, there is a process that they go through. First of all, any amendment that gets brought up before Congress has to pass both houses by 2/3. That is not easy to do. It's hard enough to just get a simple majority. So both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate, has to pass an amendment by 2/3. it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So if you remember back when we were talking about the Constitutional Convention, not every state was on board early on, but they got enough states on board, and then eventually they all did ratify it. Some actually came very late. I can't remember off the top of my head, but decades later. So ratified by 3/4 of the states. So you can have an amendment that gets passed by both houses of Congress, but actually does not get ratified by the states, sometimes until decades later. And one that is actually currently still in limbo is the Equal Rights Amendment. And I haven't checked up on this for a while, but I believe it was just in the news a few months back where Virginia actually voted to ratify the amendment for the Equal Rights Amendment. And I believe that does give them the authority to put that in there. So I don't know. We may be seeing an amendment to the Constitution in the next year or so, but we'll see. They don't come often, so I think it's very important, and it shouldn't come often, right? Same thing when we're talking about, laws. It's not a good thing to have a ton of laws being passed. It shouldn't be easy to pass a law. It needs to be debated, and especially when it comes to dealing with the Constitution, that is something that we need to give it good thought. And I have that picture up there of Prohibition. That is one in which cooler heads did not prevail. It was a horrible experiment and led to lawlessness, led to really a mockery of our Constitution. And there's only been one amendment repealed, and it is Prohibition. Easy way to remember this one is that the 18th Amendment is what created Prohibition, okay, the time period in which alcohol was illegal to consume, to produce. The 21st repealed Prohibition. So the 21st Amendment, if you actually read it, it basically says that the 18th Amendment is gone. They had to pass a whole amendment to get rid of the 18th. Now, the easy way to remember that is when you are 18 in the United States, when you are 18, you cannot drink, right? You cannot drink when you turn 18. But when you turn 21, that becomes legal in the United States. So same thing with the amendments. 18th Amendment, you cannot drink. Alcohol is prohibited. 21st Amendment is repealed. They could drink. So, and it was kind of a sad experiment. I mean, they were trying to do this for moral reasons, thinking that it would lead to less problems overall with things like domestic assault and whatnot. And but frankly, just people kept doing it, and it made criminals rich, like Al Capone. There's a lot of historians that point to, even like the war on drugs in the 70s and 80s up to now, and how it has fueled a lot of money going to cartels in Mexico, and very similar storylines there. Ultimately, Prohibition was repealed in 1933, and again, it was under FDR. A lot of the reasoning there was due to the Great Depression, and this was going to be one way that the government could have an influx of tax dollars. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. Again, I mentioned the war on drugs. If we saw that in the next few years, I mean, many states have already started to do that. But just an interesting parallel, and again, not saying right or wrong, just interesting observation. Another item that we didn't talk about, but of course has been very important in the last few months, is the process of elections. And the Constitution does give power to the Congress to decide when elections should take place. It does define specifically what day the presidency should take place. The election, was it the third? Oh boy, the third Tuesday. Or second Tuesday following the first Monday in November. I can't remember. The wording's kind of silly, but it is a very specific date every year, every 4 years that we vote for president, and the Constitution does define that. Another term that I throw around a lot, but I just want to make sure that we are clear as to what it means, is the term political parties. So, parties were not, frankly, envisioned when the Constitution was written, the modern form of these. In fact, George Washington would leave office by basically warning the American people against political parties and how they serve to further divide us. And boy, was he correct in that. But it frankly it's just kind of a natural evolution that, that you would have kind of two opposite sides of each, issue, and that ultimately, they would, often be related to the point where two major parties would emerge. And not every political system has just two parties. Some have many more. Most countries have more than two, but still, ours is, for the most part, Republican and Democrat. And those parties, now we select the candidates we want to run for those parties in primaries, and they go on to serve for that party in the election. Interest groups. This is another interesting term. So interest groups help influence both elections and politicians. And listen, it can be used for good and bad, right? There are good interest groups that lobby for greater healthcare and greater education. But there can be interest groups that form for dark reasons, and especially when we see a lot of corporate interest. Take like the oil industry for example. When we see corporations form lobbyists and interest groups to pressure politicians to allow for more freedom in the oil industry, sometimes that comes at a cost to the environment. Sometimes it comes at a cost to other technologies and industries. So interest groups are formed that basically donate money and try to influence politicians. The most common form today are what are called political action committees, or PACs, or sometimes you'll hear them referred to as super PACs, where they are able to take in a lot of money for candidates. We're getting into some kind of, again, darker issues here, and one that's really become really centered in our system since 2010. This is a fairly recent issue, and that in 2010 there was a Supreme Court case called Citizens United versus the FEC, and this group, Citizens United, was a political action committee that had formed to try and basically lobby interest for a certain political cause, and they were suing because they wanted the freedom to spend money however they wanted. They wanted to be able to spend as much money as they wanted towards a specific candidate, saying that it's basically their freedom of speech to do that, to use their money however they want. Now, the problem with this, and there's a great documentary that PBS came out with, Frontline, called Dark Money, goes into how basically super PACs kind of go around current political campaign laws. In the 1990s, Congress set limits on how much individuals could donate to specific candidates. And this was really to try and limit the influence of the ultra wealthy. It makes sense if somebody who has $1 billion is able to spend $10 million buying TV ads, that is going to go a lot farther than what your normal citizen can do. So this was to try and prevent the ultra wealthy from swaying the public en masse. But what the Citizens United did was basically reverse that law, and it allowed for, instead of kind of bypassing those campaign finance laws, so instead of directly donating to a campaign or to a political candidate, you could start up your own super PAC and TurnerForFreedom.com super PAC, and I could spend $10 million for a certain candidate if I wanted, and that, according to Citizens United decision, was my right to do so. But again, all you've done is really bypass those finance laws that were put in place in the 90s, and this has really led to, frankly, a lot of problems, because the money coming into those super PACs is not as traceable as official campaign donations. And we absolutely know that there have been foreign interests that have donated to super PACs to try and sway the American people. So again, we've seen, I mentioned that great documentary called Dark Money. They were able to trace back, millions of dollars that were coming in from both Russia and China to try and sway Americans voting. They're sending out flyers that you don't know where this is coming from, but it's all sponsored by a foreign actor. Man, you're getting into some really shady stuff. And the public, it does sway their opinion when they're constantly fed a message even if it's completely false. And that's the other thing. There's no accountability for these political action committees. There's no one to stop them from sending a flyer to people that has just complete lies on it, and paid for by Russian or Chinese. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you break it down. There's a lot of influence going on to try and buy your vote, and it's definitely it works. But Citizens United is what kind of allowed that lobbying to take place outside of normal campaign finance reforms. 2 terms, and I think this will wrap it up for us. 2 terms you definitely need to know are civic duty versus civic responsibility, and those 2 terms will absolutely be on the test. I guarantee it. But your civic duty is a required action. So if you are called up for jury duty, you have to go, or you have to have a good reason not to go. You can't just ignore it. All right, they will actually they will find you. They know where you live. Another example is the selective service system. So gentlemen watching this, congratulations. You are when you turn 18, you are required to register with the selective service system. That is your duty. You are required by law to register within 30 days of your 18th birthday. You can do that online. You can do that at the post office. This is necessary if our nation were to ever need the draft again, that we would have a list of 18-year-olds registered for that. And the selective service system, I believe it was created. We've had drafts going back a long ways, but I think the selective service system was created with World War I. I could be wrong, but either way, it's been used to draft since then. World War II, Vietnam. It has not been used since Vietnam because of how poorly that went. But that is in juxtaposition to your civic responsibility. So a responsibility is something you should do, right? You think about, your responsibilities at the house. Maybe you're responsible for, doing dishes or taking out the trash. It's something you should do, but you're probably not going to be thrown in jail if you don't do it, right? Same thing here. Your civic responsibility is to vote, to have your voice heard, but you're not required to vote, and even though you should. So civic duty versus responsibility, 2 very different things, but things that we should all do to have our voice heard. Guys, this, again, was a crash course. I know not everything was covered. Hopefully some of the readings that you guys have been doing are going to help cover some of the items I did not cover in the lecture. But regardless, I want to make sure that I am available to you. Please, as always, communicate with me if you have any questions at all. I am happy to get back to you. If something I covered was not clear, please leave a comment, shoot me an email, and I will be happy to respond. Thanks again for paying attention and tuning into this lecture.